welcome to the Writer's Mindset series with myself, Yvonne Redden, and I'm going to be chatting to a variety of authors and storytellers about what inspires and motivates a writer. Is it a particular mindset that you can develop, or are writers just born with this gift? And my guest this week is best-selling crime writer Louise Phillips. Thanks for joining me today, Louise.
Oh, it's great to be here, Yvonne. Lovely to talk to you.
We've been trying to do this for a few weeks, Louise, so we got there eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's better late than never.
For sure, yeah. We'll have loads to chat about. My questions, I incorporate the 5 W's, so it gives me a nice basis to do my questions off. So will we just start, and I'll bring your book into it as well as we go along through the conversation. Who was it? This is more about the process of writing anyway, about what way you write and how you do it. So who has been influential in your writing career to date? I mean, up to now anyway.
Yeah, I suppose, when a lot of writers are asked that question, they would think of other writers who have set them on their path. And certainly I have read work and I've gone, oh, I want to write like that. Or I'd read somebody else and I go, no, that's how I want to write. And I think, later on in the process, I discovered that, everybody writes in their own individual way. And so in relation to, I suppose, the influences, and I thought it was interesting, your introduction about, are writers born writers, or, is this something they develop? Certainly for me, like as a younger child, my mom bringing me to the library was a huge thing. Now, I know there's lots of children who go to the library who love it and other children who don't love it. But I think pretty early on, I kind of seen books and reading as a really great means of escapism, and my dad was one of these characters, like back in the day when we didn't have, streaming channels all over the place, every now and again he'd bring us to the cinema. So the cinema and the whole story becoming this sort of visual body, certainly got entrenched in my head. And even when I write now, I don't just think about story. I obviously think about the visual. Like I'm thinking, because I might be thinking, well, I want to kind of portray, the protagonist's disposition about certain things, you know what I mean? Like whether they're organized, whether they're untidy, or what they might do. So I sort of see the scene. But I think basically from those early days, from this sort of introduction to the library and also to movies, I really grasped onto the idea of story and escape, and how much happier at times I was in someone else's world, even if that world was a little bit more troubled. Because in some ways when people read, it is escapism, and it is this sense of, like, obviously I write crime thrillers, so there's always this kind of sense of anxiety on the page, but within that you do have, as the reader, a little bit of safety. You can open the windows of that world and live within it for a while. So I think what drew me to becoming a writer was definitely this love of story.
And have you been writing since you were a child, Louise?
So I used to write, and then in my teens I did quite a lot of writing, and I went to work, like the day job, quite young. Like back then, what people call the junior cert. I left school after that. It wasn't really by choice. It was just something that my parents thought this would be a good idea. Get Louise a nice little office job. And I went off and I did my nice little office job. But
you would have been 15 and 16 then, junior cert, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then I realized that I did kind of want personally to progress a little bit more. And believe me, I learned a lot about the world and things that have fed into my writing in those early years.
And people, characters, isn't it? Like, it would have been great for characters as well.
Yeah. And being in an adult environment, but that bit younger. So I went back then to do my leaving cert at night. And while I was there, I had a teacher who taught English and history. And he had sort of put me on the path to say that he felt I had a very good opportunity to have a journalistic career, which was fantastic. But then, by the time I finished, because it took me 3 years, because it takes slightly longer when you're doing it like you're working full time. So at that stage, then I shortly after I met my current husband and I got married, I ended up having 3 children, and we had a mortgage, and there was, the usual recessions and no money. 3 children, lots of pressures, and I kind of just stopped writing. And I don't think this is something that is necessarily restricted to writing. I think a lot of people, when life gets complicated, put things on the back burner that they possibly shouldn't have done. So I was talking about it for years, and I was obviously still a reader. But then when our youngest son turned 14, and it would have been slightly after my mother passed away, because I was minding her for a while too, I went to a writing class, and that night it was like, I know people talk about the cliche, that light bulb moment, but like, listening to people's work, and we were given certain things to do for the following week. Like, I just remember feeling so energized and alive. It was like, and I kept thinking, so why did I let this go? How did I let this go?
Life happens, doesn't it? You know, and that's what happens.
And so I drove home that night, and my husband was at the door greeting me, and he said, "How did you get on?" Because he was all concerned. And I said, "I can't talk to you. I have this poem in my head. I need to go upstairs and write this poem," which was actually about my father's hands, which was one of the kind of assignments we had been given. So I came back to it kind of quite late in life. And then I did a workshop with Darren Bolger. I joined a writing group. And then probably about 5 years after, I kind of went to that first class, after kind of doing short story and poetry and other things like that. I kind of set myself the task of writing a novel, and it had its different challenges. And so, and I started to, and they didn't work out. And then I just made a promise to myself I was going to start one, and I was going to finish it no matter how bad it was. And that was my first novel to be published, which was Red Ribbons. So, so that was published 10 years ago. So I haven't, I suppose, looked back.
I suppose like that. I mean, life gets in the way, gives you all content for your books kind of in a way as well. Sometimes you just have to put it on hold, but if it's always there, it'll happen, I suppose, in the end, won't it? I mean, you just might have to wait a little bit longer.
I think, you know, it like, I've known people who have sort of written books when they're kind of at home with 3 children full time, and they're doing this, and life's very hectic. But I think for me, just at that particular time in my life, I needed that window of space. And once I had that window of space, and then like, I wasn't confident at all. Sometimes I'm not actually confident now in the writing. Like, I hate everything until I don't hate it, you know what I mean? But I think, you know, I did sort of, once I started down that route, I wasn't really going to stop. I mean, there was a couple of occasions where I thought, oh my God, why the hell am I doing this? You know, and I'd fire it aside, and then maybe a couple of weeks later, I'd find myself with a notebook and a pen, or at the laptop again. And I just, well, it was just something I was going to do.
Just something you had to do. And your genre is thriller. Why do you write? Why do you find that genre? Why do you write in that style?
Well, strangely enough, I didn't originally, when I set out to write Red Ribbons, you know, set out to write a psychological crime thriller. I mean, the crux of the story is about a young schoolgirl who is found buried in the Dublin Mountains, and, you know, so obviously this whole fallout from something happening to a younger, vulnerable person. And I think when I was approaching it from the sense of, I was a mother with sort of older girls at that stage. They would have been in their late teens. And like, as you said earlier in the interview, you know, everything that you've kind of experienced in life feeds into writing, whether that's consciously or subconsciously. And I think at the time, I was trying to address what I would call a mother's worst fear about something happening to her child. So I didn't necessarily, because I hadn't sort of put myself into the niche, if you like, of crime writer, but that's the story I wanted to tell. And then as time went on, there was more aspects to it. Like, I loved the criminal psychologist. I loved, and I think most writers appreciate this thing of trying to get inside somebody's head. So that kind of all appealed to me. So ultimately it ended up being a crime novel, even though that wasn't my kind of, I suppose, what word am I looking for? Genre. That wasn't the way I looked at the way I was going, but that's where it was. And I did question like why that decision, apart from those kind of personal reasons that I spoke to you about. And then when I thought more about it, because like I did read crime fiction, but I wouldn't have been one of, because a lot of crime writers like eat crime fiction like morning, evening, and like morning, lunch, and evening or whatever. And I didn't. Like I'd read from all genres. So, but what I think of what I liked about it, I think I liked the idea that it gave me the ability to write stories around people, ordinary people, who kind of found themselves in extraordinary situations. And within crime fiction, like we're all tested. So kind of going back to that kind of psychology of humanity, you know, well, what would you do if this happened to you, and how would you react? And I also was quite sort of drawn, I think, to you know, the puzzle, answering certain questions, you know, and whereas I didn't, as I say, have this set plan, I realized that this was a medium by which I could tell the type of stories that I wanted to explore.
Yeah.
So here we are.
Yeah, I know. On your sixth, well, this is your sixth novel now.
Yeah,
they all
like.
And it's nice to pick. It'll take me a year to read that, Louise. I'm a very slow reader. Oh my God, I'm dreadful. But and like, do you have to have somewhere that you write in particular, or can you just kind of write in your bedroom there, or do you write in the kitchen? Have you got an area where you feel the energies are better to write?
Yeah, well, at this moment in time, I tend to write in this room here because it's a nice big desk.
And it's light, yeah. It's
light. But like recently, our daughter and our grandchildren moved back in with us, so this is now kind of it has a dual purpose. It's my office, and it's also my granddaughter's or our granddaughter's bedroom. So we may have to kind of relook at those plans. But I've had other areas in the house where I've written, and actually when I was writing Red Ribbons and also some of the other novels, because sometimes I tend to use multiple points of view. I might, like if I was writing from one character's point of view in the morning, like let's say the killer, for a simple example, I might be in one part of the house, but if in the afternoon I'm saying within the voice of the detective or the criminal psychologist, I'll probably place myself in another part of the house. Okay. It's sort of like going from different rooms, so that, you know, I've sort of left a sort of, I suppose, the aura of the killer and his head or her head. You have
to leave the room to go to the other character's room, kind of thing. Yeah, okay. That's interesting.
But I think primarily for me, though, I could possibly write anywhere by way of location, but I do have to have the sense that I'm not going to be disturbed. And that doesn't mean that like I close the door and say nobody needs to come here for the next 12 hours. But like if I'm writing for whatever length of time during the day, I find it easier once I get into the mindset of the characters in the fictional world to stay there and not have somebody saying, do you want a cup of tea? Do you want this? Or, you know, can you do this now? And so I kind of have a little ritual as well. I tend to play a few games of solitaire before I start as well.
Okay. I was going to ask you, do you do like anything like that? Because yeah, certain people do have little rituals.
And it's a little bit like the psychology of moving from one room to the other when you're changing the voice of a character. It's sort of trying to trick your mind into, you know, saying goodbye to the real world and saying hello to the fictional one, if that makes any sense. A
nice kind of world to step into as well, isn't it, sometimes, to get away from our realities of children, of home, of life in general, isn't it?
Yeah, and like it is this sense as well that like I'm definitely one of these writers that think of my characters a lot of the time. So like when the book is kind of finished, and when I mean finished, like it's going to print, you know, I sort of feel a sense of loss, you know, because good, bad, or indifferent, you know, for whatever reason, you know, these people came alive within my fictional world, you know, and like it's like I often do creative writing classes, and I would always say to fellow writers who you know are whether they're writing a novel or whatever it is that if you don't feel your characters are real, well, the reader isn't going to feel that either. So get that sense. You really have to A, get to know them well, and B, you know, kind of absorb the concept that they exist and they are real.
It's nearly like becoming, you remember that film years ago called Sybil that had the multiple characters and she turned into all these, it's nearly kind of turning yourself into this person that has all these multiple characters, personalities. Yeah.
And like in one way it's great, in another way it can be quite challenging, because like some characters will come to you a little bit easier than others, and others you kind of get the sense that you haven't got them yet, and you know there is no definitive way to find them, and sometimes, like I remember when I was writing Last Kiss, which had a female killer, and I thought I knew this character well, but I knew there was kind of a missing thing. I felt her voice wasn't the way, it wasn't pitched exactly the way. It wasn't grabbing me as this is the finished voice. And I remember away on holidays, and I was lying in the sun, not thinking about anything, and then like she literally said something inside my head, and I went, that's it. And luckily my husband had a pen, because I wouldn't have had a pen down at the beach. I ran up to a cafe nearby and robbed a couple of napkins and just literally wrote the voice. So once I had those 2 sentences, I knew, here she is, she's arrived.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah. Maybe when you were relaxing on the beach, maybe that's what you have to do as well when you're stuck. I want to go away and go on a beach somewhere.
Yeah, well, part of writing is, going for walks, doing things like washing the dishes or thinking about other things, and then it sort of gives a bit of breathing space for your subconscious mind to sort of kind of, because we tend, sometimes when we overthink, it's not always the best,
Yeah. And do you find, like, do you write, well, you would write all day if you're in, like, writing your books. Do you find it easier to write in the morning, or, I mean, you'd have to write all day, I presume, sometimes to get the books done?
Well, I don't necessarily write all day. I sort of divide up my day because, up until fairly recently, I was involved in the family business, so I knew I had commitments within that as well. So it wasn't like I was this sort of lofty artist in the attic who had nothing else to do, You
have a job as well.
Yeah. So one of the things I think I did work out earlier on is that I do prefer to write in the mornings, and actually, a lot of the time some of the best lines have come to me when I kind of wake up and I'm literally still half in that dream world, and I might, which is why it's important for a writer to always have paper and pen right near them at all.
Yeah.
So I would do that, and then what I tend to do is, and I'd be up quite early because my husband used to start work at 7, so like there'd be disturbances from around 5:30, 6 o'clock. So I'd be up anyway, and so I tended to write then in the mornings. And what I would do is, I would then go to the day job, and get that done. But I would always sort of write before I kind of clicked in with the outside world. I think it was always important for me, for the real world, not to get in the way, because once it did, I had a different kind of headspace, because I was thinking of other things. So then, as I say, I would do the day job, and if I was going to go back to it in the afternoon, I would tend to just do a light edit of whatever I had done earlier on. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Can I ask you as well, while we're talking about the books, how do you plan out your books? I've asked this to a couple of writers, like, do you use a storyboard, or is there a process, is there something that you use to plan it out, or does it just all come out, characters just come out and you just keep writing?
Well, I'd have to say my process is a messy process, I envy, and I one day I intend to turn into one of these writers who plans out her entire book, because they have very successful outcomes, and you avoid writing yourself into a whole load of cul-de-sacs that you have to come back out of, whatever. But for me, each book can start differently. Sometimes it can actually start with a couple of characters. Sometimes it can, say with Red Ribbons, like a mother's worst fears type of thing. That actually started because I went to a workshop, and the writer who was giving the workshop was explaining to the group that usually on your first novel, you're better off not to change gender. So if you're a female, your protagonist is probably best being female. If you're a male, your protagonist is male, and that kind of bothered me a little bit. So I sort of said, well, if I was going to get inside a man's head, whose head did I want to get into? So I ended up like picking someone who had quite a lot of messed up things in there.
Yeah.
I'm digressing from your original question.
No, go ahead.
So like sometimes it can be something like that to start the process, and other times it can be something like, say, within They All Lied, I wanted to kind of portray within a story the sense of not being able to trust anyone, and what do you do if you're placed inside that position. I also sort of want to explore the idea of sort of element of gaslighting and control, and I suppose again, and I will get to the crux of the question now. Like, I was only after my fourth novel. I remember there's an academic in the US who, like, she would have done a lot of work on crime fiction, and certainly Irish crime fiction, that she sort of talked about the feminist sort of issues that I address in my book, you know, and like feminist issues that like we're aware of today, but have always been aware of, you know, like, you know, psychological and physical abuse, or, you know, different things to do with kind of Ireland that I grew up in, without kind of being, I suppose, you know, you do reflect the Ireland that you've experienced. So all of those things would have fed in. But in relation to process, there's usually something that comes into my head that doesn't go away, because lots of things come inside your head and they don't go away. Or they go away. But if something is sticking around, there's usually a reason for it. And I've learned not to question that question. If for whatever my instincts are telling me, this is where you're being drawn now, well, that's where I go, irrespective of how successful that will be. And so my process usually starts with an idea and a couple of characters. And so my writing tends to be what they call organic writing, which means you start, you get to the end. And like lots of people would kind of compliment my books by things are really well plotted and all of that thing. And some of that plotting is instinctual. Some of that plotting and cliffhangers and, you know, questioning the reader certain times comes from me just being familiar with kind of things that are important within the genre, the type of things that I would enjoy reading. And other times they happen because at the end of the first draft, I go, okay, so this is the story. Now, how best to tell this story? Because there are people who will apply structure from the beginning. Okay, in Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to have this turning point at that, whatever. But what I feel is that no matter whether you plan or plot at the beginning, or you end up with your first manuscript or your first draft, and then you start to kind of sculpt together, ultimately your story will have a structure, because there is the best way to tell that story. And I would often have the first draft where, like, maybe on chapter 8, I decide, oh, actually, that's going to be the first chapter. So the structure comes after the effect. But my plan is, and I have this plan with every novel I start to write, when I start to write my next novel, which hopefully will be the week after next, I'm going to apply an outline and a structure, broad one, and I'm going to see how that goes.
Do you use a board or anything with Post-its and all that? Do you use anything physical? No.
I have tried that. What I found is that when I know what's going to happen next, I'm kind of already bored with it. So I'm going to try a technique with the next novel that's slightly different to what I've done before. I'm going to kind of have a broad outline as to, well, what is this kind of about, even though it might end up being about something else in the end, but what is this kind of about? Who's going to be in this fictional world? And how best will I tell this story? Looking in general at maybe the opening or Act 1, the middle bit, Act 2, and the end, which is 3. And then just take it that without too much detail and see how that works for me.
You use mind mapping at all, Louise?
I have used mind mapping. Tend to use mind mapping if I'm sort of stuck with a character or a particular chapter or whatever it might be. I would, like, let's say it's protagonist, you know, I might put their name in the center of like a map, and then go, okay, what are their hopes and fears? You know, what are the challenges? What do they believe they want? What do they actually want? You know, stepping in that way. So so I'll use it, and I also will use it for a chapter, especially a chapter where there is requirements to tell the reader a lot of different things. So I might sort of kind of map that out.
Yeah.
And what I like about mind mapping, now I wouldn't use it all the time for everything at all, but what I like about it when I use it is that it kind of kicks into different side of your brain. So it's, instead of things being linear, they're sort of spread out, and you see a different picture than you would if it was just a linear list of things, you know.
They're nice methods. And I suppose the whole idea of this series is about the writer's mindset. And like, you teach workshops and you teach writing classes. Do you think that it can be taught to somebody if you have that interest in writing, or is it something that you are born with? I mean, really, what do you think? You can get all these, you know, tools to help you learn how to write. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. I think if somebody wants to write, that's already part of their writing journey, you know, and just making that decision. Like when I went back to writing after a period of time, you know, as I said, like there was times that I was asking myself, why am I doing this madness? Why am I driving myself mad? Why am I getting frustrated with this story? Why don't I just have an easy life? And then I find myself coming back. Yeah. So I think once you make that decision, I think that's a good thing. And I think for me, and again, I just digress a little bit, for me, I had to give myself permission to nearly write a bad novel before I could actually write a whole novel.
Okay.
If that makes sense. Yeah. So, and I've worked with a lot of writers over the time, and I've also been in writing groups. And one of the things that I have discovered is, or I've observed, I suppose, is that I've seen writers who possibly have an okay talent, but not this sort of, oh my God, that's brilliant, I can't wait to read the next thing. And I've been in groups where there's been writers who've been extremely talented. And what I've noticed over time is that the people who are actually A, passionate about wanting to write, and B, are determined to write. The more you write, the better your writing will become. And someone who might have been an average good writer can become a great writer, a much better writer. Yeah. And people who have done from the get-go, you know, they don't progress. So I think, you know, it is something that you can develop the more that you do it. Okay. Whereas I know there'll be people who wouldn't be major advocates of workshops and things like that. I tend to look on them as, I just want to share with people the things that I learned over time that I wish somebody had have told me in the beginning.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you next. Is there any advice you can give to new emerging writers? But I think surrounding yourself with people, that like-minded people, helps too. When you're talking to writers, when you're going to workshops, even if you're not going to write that next best novel, which, you know, most people, well, some people won't, surrounding yourself with that and that conversation around you, that narrative, it does encourage you and boost you with your writing, you know?
There is that, but then there's also a sense of, you know, that you're taking this seriously. Yeah. Like, if I'm giving a workshop, I will always kind of talk to other participants in the workshop as a fellow writer, because they are fellow writers. Yeah. And, you know, you kind of have to move at some point, even if you never get published, in my, because my mindset was, if I can write a novel, beginning, middle, and end, I was a novelist. Even if nobody ever wanted to publish it or nobody ever wanted to read it, that's what I do. So, but you can make the mistake of thinking, oh, this is kind of a hobby, or this is a bit of a luxury, you know. Well, actually, no. You know, you want to create something, which is great. You're doing this out of a sense of passion that you want to tell the story. Yeah. Nobody is ever going to be able to tell the story the way you do. And so kind of give yourself respect for that, and, you know, and recognize that it's not a luxury. It's something that you want to do.
And there's room out there for writers of everyone tells a story differently as well. You know, there's loads of crime writers, but everyone has their own way of doing of telling that story. So there's room for loads of writers, I think.
And nobody, to be honest with you, like what I would say to other writers out there, are people who are thinking about maybe who thinking about starting a novel, maybe they've done short story or other things like that, is to just recognize that nobody is going to tell the story the way you're going to tell it. And you may not get it perfect first time around. In fact, it's unlikely that you will. But you need to learn to trust the process. But the other thing that I will say is that you know, when you make the decision to write a novel, you're making that commitment to something quite wonderful. So, you know, you need to just kind of immerse yourself in that and not necessarily think about it being published or anything, but just how am I best going to tell this story, you know? And there's plenty of successful self-published authors out there as well. Do you know what I mean?
God, yes, that publishing world is huge, isn't it? I mean, there's amazing writers there in that world as well. And are you reading anything at the moment? Have you got 3 books that you're reading?
Well, I'm not one of, like, I'm like you, I'm a slow reader. Like
I'm very, very slow. As I said, come back to me next year and I'll probably still be reading your book, Louise.
I just want to pick up all the details. Well, I hope not.
I won't. I'll write a review, don't you worry. No, once I get into it, I'll be grand. It's just, I've 3 children too, so it's finding that time to sit down. Oh, you know yourself, you know, from being a mum.
Yeah, so well, I tend, my reading rate is dismal, like 30 pages an hour, like if I've no interruptions. At the moment I'm reading Verity. I don't know whether you've read that by any chance. It's by a girl called Colleen Hoover. Now she's had quite a number of books, but the minute I started to read it, I just knew I was in the hands of someone who was able to tell a great story. I'm also re-listening on audio to The Yellow Wallpaper. I don't know whether you've, like, this is a book that came out in I think it's 1852 or something, but it's kind of considered to be sort of one of the kind of earliest feminist literary works. Now it's very short. But it's really about a woman who is, you know, well, what she had at the time was temporary nervous depression was the way it was described. But really, you know, it kind of goes a lot deeper than that. So I'm re-listening to that again because I thought that was, like, if you haven't read it.
Interesting. I'll write all these in. I'll put the links in. The Yellow Wallpaper. I thought you were talking about my mum's house back in the 1970s there. But they like to go.
And the other one that I'm at the moment, which is not a fiction book, but it's called The Little Book of Autism, because our granddaughter was diagnosed with autism last year. And I adore her, but she's one of the most fascinating people I've ever met. And actually on the wallpaper thing, I was chatting to her the other night because she gets quite nervous at night because she tends to imagine different things with shadows and I said, I was like that. You know, I was always convinced there was something under the bed. And I looked at a wall, not that we pattern wallpaper too much these days, but if I look at a pattern for long enough, I'm going to see something that isn't there. Do you know what I mean?
But that's your imagination as well. You see, you have that imagination because you're a writer. I think you see things.
So The Little Book of Autism is so quite ones, but
quite different as well, but it's nice to have that diverse. I can only do 1 book at a time. I have about 10 books beside my bed, but only read 1 at a time. I'm a one.
But this is why I would say, like I'm obviously reading Verity, which I would definitely recommend. I'm probably about a third of the way through, but it's really great. And The Yellow Wallpaper I'm listening to on audio because that's a different thing.
And then when you're out walking as well, they're lovely to listen to, aren't they?
And then a factual book is good to just have as reference, you know what I mean?
And now you've got workshops and all coming up soon, so maybe if you want to tell people when the dates they're on, if you'd like to.
So I'm just finishing a workshop for South Dublin Libraries, and the last workshop is actually tonight, but I think it's on the 27th of let me just check it. I think it's the 27th of April. I'm starting one in the Irish Writers Centre. I've done a few in the Irish Writers Centre, but basically it'll be on 6:30 to 8:30 at the Irish Writers Centre. You know, 1 day a week, starting the 27th. And so it's called Write That Novel. So it's about kind of instilling the confidence in writers to kind of take on that beast of a novel. And even if you're kind of have done your first draft or whatever, there'll be so much that I will look forward to sort of, you know.
And it's in person as well, no more Zoom.
It's this is actually the first in-person workshop I will have.
Everyone will be so excited. Can you imagine? People will be like, wow, it's just so long.
I mean, Zoom was great,
It is.
but there's a
Yeah.
different dynamic to the physical, in-person workshop. So definitely, if you want to write that novel,
Mm.
and a lot of the writers who have worked with me over the years, like many of them have gone on to be published, and there's a few international bestsellers in there now. So, hopefully, I'm doing something right.
Well, you must be, and I think you are, Louise. Can you tell people where you are most active on social media?
Oh yeah, so I am on Twitter,
Yeah.
at Louise M for Marie. So at Louise M Phillips
Yeah.
is my Twitter handle. I don't actually know my handle on Facebook, but just look for me and you'll
And you
probably.
like your Facebook would be your like most one that you're on a lot, isn't it? You like Facebook? Do you find
Yeah,
it? Yeah.
Facebook is kind of different. Like they're
Yeah.
all like, and I'll be on Instagram. On Instagram, I think I'm Louise Phillips author. So
Yeah.
Louise Phillips author is Instagram. At Louise M Phillips is Twitter. And just go onto Facebook and look for Louise Phillips, and I'll be the one looking stressed. You'll find.
No, you won't. And your book is in most bookshops.
Yeah, so I hit the bestseller list on the first week, which was great,
Yay.
and it's got lots of really good reviews. And I'm proud of it. I think it was a story well worth telling.
And I love the cover as well. And anyone who's read it, please leave a review because they are crucial, aren't they, for authors?
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, that's great. Congratulations on that. And thank you so much for your time today, Louise. You gave us so much information there. I think I've had a workshop today.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Yvonne. Thanks
Thank you. So many
Okay.
thanks for your time. Thanks again, Louise. And if anyone wants to contact me, I'm across all social media. This will be up on YouTube soon. And see you next time on The Writer's Mindset. Thank you, Louise.
Thank you.